Right? Right? Yeah. Let me just say I agree completely. I so approve that message. So good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you all to this afternoon's event, Black Female Voices, Who is Listening? A public dialogue between Bell Hooks and Melissa Harris Perry, the last public event in Bell Hooks' week-long residency at the New School. My name is Gail Drakes, and I am Director of the Office of Social Justice Initiatives, housed within the Office of the Provost here at the New School. The office seeks to both support and amplify the efforts of those who are working throughout the university to more fully realize the New School's progressive vision as reflected in all aspects of our institution. Having just arrived at the New School in August, I can say that the Bell Hooks residency has been a highlight in my time here. And that is not only thanks to the insights shared in the various events this week, but because of the excitement it's generated within the New School community. In the week leading up to the residency, it seemed that at any given moment, just walking down the street or entering an elevator, you could very likely overhear conversations and reflections among students, faculty, and staff on Bell Hooks and her work. So it is my hope that while this week-long residency is ending, that those conversations and reflections on the significance of Bell Hooks' work can continue and expand here at the New School. Of course, I would like us all to thank those who made this event possible and the entire residency possible. So please join me in a round of applause for Stephanie Browner, Dean of Eugene Lang College, Judy Pryor Ramirez and Catherine Smith of Lang's Office of Civic Engagement and Social Justice, Heather O'Brien, Assistant to the Dean, and everyone at both Berea and the New School who helped coordinate these events. I do have to announce a small change in our schedule. Unfortunately, our guests do have to leave immediately after the conversation and regret that they will not be able to sign books as planned, but I'm very grateful we're going to still be able to enjoy the conversation. So I have the honor of introducing these women who I know for so many of us in the room truly need no introduction. But then I'm still very pleased to offer this reminder of the accomplishment of our guests today. Bell Hooks is among the leading public intellectuals of her generation. Born in Hopkinsville, Kentucky in 1952, she grew up in a working-class family with 6 siblings. Hooks received her BA from Stanford University in 1973, her MA in 1976 from the University of Wisconsin, and her PhD in 1983 from the University of California, Santa Cruz, with a dissertation on author Toni Morrison. Her use of a pseudonym is intended to honor both her grandmother, whose name she took, and her mother, while her name's unconventional lower casing signifies what is most important in her works, quote, the substance of books, not who I am, unquote. Hooks' writings cover a broad range of topics including teaching, gender, class, and race, the idea of a white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. She strongly believes that these topics cannot be dealt with separately, but must be understood as interconnected and linked in the production and perpetuation of systems of oppression and class domination. A prevalent topic in her most recent writing is community and communion, the ability of loving communities to overcome race, class, and gender inequalities. Hooks has written over 30 books, including personal memoirs, poetry collections, and children's books, as well as numerous scholarly and mainstream articles. She has taught at several colleges and universities, lectured widely in public forums, and appeared in several documentary films. It's a Bell Hooks bio. There's a lot going on there. I gotta hydrate. Melissa Harris Perry is the host of MSNBC's Melissa Harris Perry. The show airs on Saturdays and Sundays, which some of you seem to know, probably, from 10 a.m. to noon Eastern Time. Harris Perry is a professor of political science at Tulane University, where she's the founding director of the Anna Julia Cooper Project on Gender, Race, and Politics in the South. Harris Perry is author of the well-received new book, Sister Citizen, Shame, Stereotypes, and Black Women in America, published by Yale 2011, and the award-winning text, Barbershops, Bibles, and BET, Everyday Talk and Black Political Thought, published by Princeton University Press in 2004. Professor Harris Perry is a columnist for The Nation magazine, where she writes a monthly column also titled Sister Citizen. She lives in New Orleans with her husband, James Perry, and is the mother of a terrific daughter, Parker. While these bios offer considerable insight into all they've done, they can't fully represent the effect they've had on so many. Melissa Harris Perry, Empress of Nerdland, check out our Nerdland hashtag on Twitter if you don't know what I mean, has used her show on MSNBC to expand the notion of what is political and to amplify the voices of those we rarely, if ever, see represented on cable news. She brings the full force of her passion, personality, and intellect to her show and changed what we thought was possible on a cable news show. And bell hooks. There are many ways to determine the reach and power of someone's work as a writer and academic. Often we think about number of reviews, the number of times one is cited by other scholars, etc. But to understand the significance of bell hooks' work, you must think in terms of the number of lives touched and worldviews transformed. While I navigate a society that offers such a painfully narrow representation of who can be a public intellectual, I take heart and remember that it has been bell hooks' books that I've so often seen in the hands of black women as they would ride the bus home from work, and the insight from her books, dog-eared, reread, and well-loved, that helped inform the work of a generation of cultural workers, activists, and feminist scholars who are now impressive in their own right. So I just want to say, both personally and on behalf of all of us assembled here, a sincere thank you to both of these women for all the ways in which they've served to help us reimagine what is possible at the intersection of education, public life, and the struggle for freedom. And thank you for giving us all the opportunity to listen into this conversation today. Everyone, please help me welcome bell hooks and Melissa Harris Perry.
I'm not used to being with a celebrity.
Oh. Yeah, I'm pretty sure in this crowd you're the celebrity. So we were trying to figure out how to get started, and I wanted to start by just picking up on that last insight about the fact that none of us come to Black feminism except through you. And I was just recently on the campus of Bennett College in Greensboro, North Carolina, and it was a kind of wonderful moment like this where I rarely get a chance where I was standing and looking out over the chapel, and it was all African American women and girls and all of the faculty in their academic regalia. It was kind of a great moment. But one of the freshmen came up to me afterward and put her hand on my arm and fairly breathlessly said, "Have you read bell hooks?" And I thought, yep.
I am 20 years older than this baby up here. And one of the things that I thought about is my early work focused so much on the question of finding our voice. And I was thinking about how Melissa represents a generational shift because she has this whole national voice. And so part of what we want to talk about is, has there been a meaningful, concrete change in how we hear, think, and feel about the Black woman's voice? Because many of you may have seen the show where Melissa is talking. Was she an economist?
Uh-huh.
And
yes, I think that is the official title of what Ms. Mehta is.
And I was so impressed myself, and it was like a love moment for me when Melissa just, really boldly put out there what we know to be real and true. And then I was so stunned when I kept hearing from people, she really lost it. And I kept thinking, if this was Charlie Rose, if this was any number of white men who would just boldly speak their truth. She didn't raise her voice in any way. There was, for me, no sense of aggression. But once again, she was turned into the angry Black woman, not the insightful, brilliant Black woman who just threw down in such a way that it created a sense of awe. And so that then gave me pause in thinking about, on one hand, has there been a shift, or are we still pushing against a certain characterization of the Black female voice?
I meant to answer.
I
You're
suppose, meant to discuss.
Yes. So I'm not sure how I ended up with a television show, and I don't mean that to be joking. I really am not quite sure how that happened. Clearly, it's about a set of very odd occurrences that were part of this moment historically, where you end up with an African American man as president, and you end up with the most popular commentator on this African American male president being a queer woman who is out and butch when they don't overly make her up, and so there's sort of a shift that occurs around representation, and that shift that occurs around representation occurs at the same time that there's a profit motivation to get an audience, right? So I don't want to miss that. There's no moment in cable news where people are making any kind of decision that isn't based on a belief that there is audience and income and something else out there. So I assume, you talk about being 20 years younger, so I come of age in exactly the right, in fact, I pretty regularly say, like, the smartest thing you could have ever done was to have been born in the 70s. If you were going to be born a Black girl, like, to be born in the 70s meant being born right at the end of that civil rights struggle, but before the backlash got really ugly, in the one moment when there were integrated public schools in the South, just for that 1 second before white flight took all the resources out of the public schools in the South, right at that moment, so that when I graduate from college, we're in an economic upswing and there are jobs. When I finish the PhD, people are getting multiple academic jobs, not like searching for an adjunct position. Like, there's just structurally a set of realities. Yeah. But I don't think any of those structural realities that let a little moment like me come through represents an American shift in who we want to hear from.
All right. Whereas I feel, enormously blessed. I always get annoyed with my sister when she says she's blessed and highly favored. But, but I do want to say that I think of myself just as, Melissa has a mainstream image voice that I came up really out of nowhere. Little bell hooks writing Ain't I a Woman, Black Women, and Feminism. And that sometimes I do feel like, wow, there is this audience that reads bell hooks and that tells me how my work has affected their life. And I think as a Black woman writer, that is so amazing. I mean, when I think about Audre Lorde, when I think about Pat Parker, when I think about Zora Neale Hurston, and I think about all the Black women writers, I mean, my students already don't know who Audre Lorde is. They never knew who Pat was, And I think that to be a Black woman writer of nonfiction and to be read is to be blessed and highly favored. And so I think that just as there is space now for your voice because it's a product, it sells, it creates people like us running to hear her and watch her, there's also that other climate of people searching for truly dissonant ways of thinking and being and trying to carve out different ways to live our lives. And I think that's especially a tension for Black women because we haven't, as a group, really carved out different ways to live our lives.
I wanted to ask you about that a little bit because there are things about the bizarro life that I find myself living now that I sometimes feel as though I'm judging against a set of Black feminist standards that I ultimately learned and decided to believe in from your text. So if the lowercase letters of bell hooks are in part about a recognition that the ego is less important than the content, it was, in fact, very painful for me when MSNBC named the show Melissa Harris Perry. And I fought it, and I had 4,000 other really funny names, but and they were also all sounded like some other networks shows, but in part because I thought, no, what we're supposed to be doing is not saying, watch me, it's all about me, but instead spend time in the content. So I guess part of what
By the way, that failed. I mean, people became as obsessed with bell hooks.
Yeah.
And the lowercase did not
right,
do.
yes, yes.
It didn't do the work that I felt as a spiritual, because for me, it was not just a political, it was a spiritual decision at the time, about who am I and where do I place myself. And I didn't want to place myself, my personality, my ego, but other people placed it. So they just reified and fetishized the small bell hooks. Mm-hmm. So I realized, how much power we don't have over how our representations are perceived. And that kind of goes back to my saying that when people think we're angry or strident or difficult, when we may not have that perception of ourselves at all. When I first published Ain't I a Woman, the white women at South End Press said, it was such an angry book, and I didn't know what they were talking about. Because again, I felt it was a clear book. It was a book saying things that hadn't been said before. But anger, I'm one of these black women. If I'm angry, you're gonna know that I'm angry, and I'm gonna own my anger. And so I knew that wasn't the case, and that has been something that I feel is a constant battle. I've been referring a lot to Sweet Honey in the Rock. When we work for freedom, we cannot rest, because people are constantly using anger and difficult. I mean, I have to admit, I get difficult now more than anger. Bell is difficult. When people drop you, or when from publishing or something, and they say, well, Bell is difficult. Yep. And it's because you raise certain kinds of images. And once again, I think it's about, Melissa, that interface between our radical political integrity and the fact that we are in imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy. So,
well, and you might be, so I was angry at Miss Metha. Her inability to see that it was patently.
Mess up all my theories.
Right, no, but but not just her. I was angry with the idea that we continue to propagate this notion that to be poor is somehow relaxing, that people are chilling on public service, and that riskiness is associated with wealth, right? So the only thing I push back against is the notion that I'm irrationally. I'm mad, but I'm mad about something. I'm not mad as an inherent aspect of my blackness or my womanhood, right? But mad about something. And I get difficult, but I am difficult. But so too. So are all the white guys, right? And I'm legitimately not trying to be funny in the sense that I know that I come to work after my producers come to work, and I'm a little bit, demanding, and, a lot of times, I difficult. But all the white boys who are difficult too, in everything from the academy to general life to, right? But it's as though that difficulty is presumed to be legitimate, whereas ours is illegitimate.
Whereas, it's funny. I don't think that I'm difficult. I think I'm exacting and precise. And I think the words that we use are very important, because I think that for me, let's face it, folks. You don't be a black woman from a working class background in America and write more than 30 books because you're sitting around being difficult. Right. That work comes out of the amazing discipline of my life, which I don't necessarily attribute to my ego or me, but to the recognition of what it takes to get a particular job done. And that will, as many of you have experienced in this room, to write, to put other things aside, to write, to sit at my computer and key in the Beast of the Southern Wild piece, while I am sitting there crying because I just can't take another image of an abused black child being represented as entertaining. And I am sitting there and I'm writing, but I'm also hurting. I'm hurting because we can't get past the construction of black children as little mini adults whose innocence we don't have to protect. You know, who we can consider cute if they're being slapped around by an alcoholic father. You know, not to mention all the other things we could name.
Well, and then the abuse not only of the character, but of Quavontané Wallace by black and white communities in the immediate aftermath of that film, which I really, really disliked that film, and watched it in New Orleans, sat in a theater in New Orleans and watched it, and came home and read your piece, and in fact, this, like the moment of the Bennett student saying, "Have you read Bell Hooks?" Coming back and reading your piece and saying, "Oh, Bell's back," and in part that the pain, the anger, but also that this was one of those movies we were supposed to like, and we were supposed to say good and nice things about, and was supposed to be arty and fun, and you're supposed to be deep and get it, and your willingness to say, no, the abuse of a young black girl's body is not deep, it's appalling.
And also, why can't we teach other people to recognize that this is traumatic and not funny and not cute, and that's that, again, when we work for freedom, we cannot rest because it's a constant struggle. I mean, it's interesting because I can tell you right now, Miss Melissa liked 12 Years of Slavery, and I really hated it. I thought that, or I won't even say I hated it, I said, sentimental claptrap. But one of the things that I felt about it, and because we don't want to just sit here and act like we smooch and agree on everything, I felt that it actually negated the black female voice, that she was given voice only in so much as she gave expression to black male emotional feeling, that the black male does not have to take responsibility for his own emotional universe, that Patsy takes that cross. So it's like, okay, not only are you suffering, but you've got to take on you the added burden of articulating this black man's pain to him. So
how much of that, though, and this is part of why I've approached this film so differently than the other slave films. How much of that is because it is the reading of his autobiography, his slave narrative, and so that is what he does to her. Like, he does, in fact, create Patsy in that way in that text, and so the film reproduces the thing that he, as black patriarch, even in the context of enslavement, does to her.
Yeah, honey, but if the filmmaker can create for us that scene with Mrs. Shaw that is not in the book, then why can't he? I mean, one of the things I stand on all the time, film does not exist for the purpose of giving us reality. And I always say, like, if my life is shit, I don't want to go pay $10 or $12 to see it displayed, so that we have to ask ourselves, I guess what I want for us all the time, Melissa, and which some of us feel happens on your show, is a pushing of the imagination, a broadening of how we think about things, and not the sort of narrowing down of how we think about things. And I feel like, I'm tired of the naked, raped, beaten black woman body. I want to see an image of black femaleness that alters our universe in some way. I mean, Melissa, which is a question I was dying to ask her, so I could get to ask her tonight. In Sister Citizen, she really writes critically about Michelle Obama, for example, as representing that kind of shift, that we have this transformative image. And I feel like, yes, we started out with this incredible, powerful black female voice, Michelle Obama, and it got smaller and smaller. And I wondered if you think that, or if you think that it kept the momentum that it began with.
Yeah, so for me, First Lady Obama is navigating multiple spaces, and in some ways it has retained its bigness and its value, and in other ways it has diminished. Most importantly for me, I think there was an active, purposeful, and I think she has said it to us, desire to remove from public space that idea of the Black woman who emasculates her husband, that she very actively and purposely moved back from the partnership model that we saw initially. Not only partnership, but actually an active critique of her husband. So when Senator Obama is running in 2007 and 8, she has a variety of punchlines, one of which includes, oh yeah, Barack is stinky in the morning and he leaves his socks around. She had another line that was about feeling like a single parent for much of their early marriage because he was working downstate. And so she was taking on all the parenting. Well, she was the primary breadwinner, and she was taking on all the parenting. And then there was also a narrative about her relationship with Mama Robinson and the importance that Mama Robinson had in stepping in as the second parent when State Senator Barack Obama was downstate. And that narrative went away after the primaries. So as soon as basically they got through about South Carolina and it became clear that it was very possible that Barack Obama could win the Democratic primary, Michelle Obama, the wife, became the much more traditional political wife who supports in a sort of doe-eyed way her husband. But that wasn't the totality. So on that hand, yes, I would agree. I think she shrinks. But the other thing I offer, though, is this possibility that she's performing two other things that I do find to be a sustaining pushing of the imagination. One is about her body and this initial desire to dissect First Lady Obama in all the ways that we have dissected women, Black women in particular, since the Venus Hottentot. And so rather than talking about Michelle Obama as an embodied person, we would talk about her arms. I want Michelle Obama's arms. I want Michelle Obama's behind. I want, right? And so that it was a rhetorical and public dissection of her into parts so that we weren't talking about her, but talking about the parts of her body. Now, for me, the immediate, rational, reasonable response to that is to stop performing your body, to when people are talking about your body to cover. That's what our grandmothers taught us, right? Girl, hold it in, keep it tight, right? Because people, but instead, the First Lady did this sort of extraordinary thing where she was like, oh, you want to scrutinize? Here I am. She went even more sleeveless. She had this amazing, I encourage you to go home and Google just put in hula hoops, First Lady Obama. There's this incredible series of her in the first spring that they're in the White House spring of 2009. And she's this 6-foot-tall Black woman, barefoot, hula hooping and running across the White House lawn. And it is, like when I say that, right, that sounds like some kind of weird racist KKK movie, right? But instead, it's like it is completely beautiful and not beautiful in some like Jackie O, like oh she's like Jackie O. I know she's right. She's this embodied in this very different way, and the very fact that she goes to an obesity politics that in part invites scrutiny both of her body and then undoubtedly of her daughters is sort of an unwillingness to shrink. So she shrinks in the wife role. I feel her stand up in the sort of inviting the scrutiny of the body. And the last thing I'll say is when there was this attempt to do, and it's the one thing I loved about 12 Years a Slave, for me, 12 Years a Slave is the first time that there wasn't a cinematic redemption of the white woman slaveholder. And instead, they are made absolutely complicit and evil and attached, and there is no sense that there is some gender equity that will nope.
And you didn't
so,
see that in Django?
I can't talk about Django Bell.
Okay, but I have to say that one of my favorite scenes is when the two very obedient Black female slaves are on that stairway, and Django tells them to say goodbye to Miss Anne, and they've been so obedient and subservient. But it's like that open door of freedom that when they have the opportunity to walk through that open door freedom, that whole, to me, at that moment, the mammy image is totally deconstructed. And they're like, goodbye, and he blows her away. I see that as also that reminder of complicity, that white women have been complicit in this imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy, and not just these sort of passive observers or victims. But let's not belabor.
But I can't. But I just like Django. But because for me, what happened in those first moments in the movie theater in 12 Years a Slave, when they're taken onto the ship, and then the people who have been watching way too much Django are like, I can't even believe you just go. Why didn't you go fight back? Because this is not a fantasy. Because this is a slave narrative. Because because the scene then when he is lynched for days is what happens when you fight. Because they kill Omar with a shank in like 2 minutes, and he had been for me, I guess the reason that Django does not perform that for me is because it's the fantasy.
But see, I think it's all fantasy.
Okay.
I think it's all fiction. It's all. I mean, I have to say the only slavery movie that I can really say really touched me was Slavery by Another Name, the fictive documentary, because it had those real black people. I mean, I had the good fortune to see it at Sundance with Eric Holder and his wife, whose family is part of the film and part of that experience. I myself, I'm going to say that what I'm tired of in general is sentimentality. I mean, James Baldwin said sentimentality is the ostentatious parading of excessive and spurious emotion. It is the mark of dishonesty, the inability to feel. So we can go away from particular movies. I'm concerned about why is it that there's a kind of collective response to the plantation culture we as black people are living in that has primarily to do with sentimentality. With people, whether we're talking about The Butler, whether we're talking about some of Tyler Perry's stuff, it's like, let's stand and weep, and let's weep and weep, and while we're weeping, the violence against us globally, the global slavery continues. And I'm trying to analyze it. Maybe you have some thoughts about it, but why is there this obsession at this historical moment with sentimentality and melodrama? Because my favorite melodrama is Imitation of Life. I'm old enough to have left. Mama, I did love you. But again, Mama don't get to hear that because she did. And so, what are your thoughts about that? This sort of upsurge, I feel, in sentimental portraits of blackness. And we don't just have to talk about slavery, because the Butler certainly,
Yes. Okay, so I mean, all right, so there's Django on the one hand, then there's the Butler, and God help me, the Help. I guess
all of which are sentimental.
Yes, right. So I'm just kind of running in my head what you're saying and trying to think through this a little bit. It certainly felt to me like the Help and the Butler are popular culture responding to the angst of the possibility not only of black empowerment in the personhood of President Obama, but also the desire for the magical Negro to reappear to make things better. So that the economic downturn itself, right, and the sense of white America experiencing for the first time in 50 years the unemployment rates that black folks have been living with for 60 years, right? So the Tea Party can actively, just weeks after President Obama's inauguration, can sort of take to the mall in anger about a 10% unemployment rate, when we know like 10% unemployment rate for black people would be cause for like Juneteenth, right? We would be happy. And I presume that part of what happens then, why we need the Butler, why we need the Help, and And so maybe, and I'm going to pause and think about, maybe this is also why we need to bring back slavery, but I'm not sure, but I'll think about it. But maybe the reason we need to go engage with them in our fictional, emotional lives is because those Negroes they solved the problems of America through their willingness to sacrifice for the American project. And so, I mean, the fact that, I will say, so at the end of 12 Years a Slave, what happens? He goes to the American court system, right? There is no Django like the fantasy is that, right? What the actual enslaved man does is he goes and takes these men to court. There is a presumption, even in that moment, that somehow there will be justice available. The thing that we actually did in the years following emancipation was to run for office and buy land. And I mean, so maybe there's a desire to reconstruct that version of black folks so that we could fix what is currently wrong, because that's always been our magical capacity.
Or so that we can simply grieve. We can have a vehicle for the expression of the depth of our grief. Because I do believe that for some time now, black people collectively have been caught in a profound grief. I've been working on writing about justice and using Martin Luther King's "Where Do We Go From Here?" And I'm just amazed that Dr. King was talking about fascism. He was talking about he was so prescient that there will be things like the Tea Party. And the thing that he says that's so amazing is that there will be this growth of a native form, these are his words, of fascism, as black people press forward for equality. And then he says that awesome insight that white people would rather destroy democracy than have racial equality. And I think we know that that's not true of all white people, but we really see that in those of us who live in very depressed white areas like Appalachia. I mean, we see it so clearly that people would rather have white supremacy and hierarchy than any kind of justice. That people really think justice, those Negroes have had enough. We've given them enough. And so I think that's what troubles me, Melissa, about the sentimentality, because I feel it shifts us away from the forms of analysis. I am myself, I've been a reader of King, but I had been away from Where Do We Go From Here? And so when I read it again, and I thought, boy, King was talking about fascism, about what we had to do, and so much of what he puts out we haven't done. The critical consciousness. It just kind of, in a way, saddened me so deeply, because I think that we do live in this space, black people, brown people, of cognitive dissonance, that we know white supremacy is real, but at the same time, we would like to walk through our daily lives as though justice is real, democracy is real, equality is real. I mean, if anything that I could say about 12 years of slavery is that it depicted that we see them walking through their lives thinking they've made it, that they can live as assimilated black people in this bourgeois white world. And there is something so almost unbelievable about his level of innocence about the horrific nature of white supremacy, because he really believes that there is a whiteness that will protect him. And that to me is like, wow, if someone can come from that time period and believe that whiteness will protect them, then I think about our son, our brother, Trayvon Martin. What did he think would protect him? Did he think that he was in danger of losing his life? Or did he have that innocence again about whiteness that many of us carry, and many of our young people carry it especially? I mean, both here at the New School, everywhere I go, it is young people especially who will argue that race has ended, that we're in the post-racial. Go ahead, jump in.
Yeah. So I would push back against that just a little bit. That young people So I do think millennials may think about race in ways that are different and more complicated, but they ought to. I mean, because the world is different. But that Kathy Cohen's research out of the Black Youth Project and the writings of the Black Youth Project 100 and all of them do suggest that actually because of their very close contact with the police state and with incarceration and with the ways in which this, so again, the racial naivety of the kids of the 70s, all right, I'm gonna give that to you. Because we were in this sort of moment, right? And then even as Reagan was happening, Bill Cosby was the, #1 rated show on TV. So there were ways in which that's, I'm gonna take that critique for the X generation, but I'm not quite willing to say that of young people of color in their 20s, the generation one under me, only because the material realities of their vulnerability are so present for them. Now, it may be true that that population is even more stratified. So for the wealthy children, there is a different reality. But I don't want to give it to the whole generation. I don't want to say young people don't know. And my bet is that Trayvon may not. So in fact, so I want to come back in a minute to using King as a source, especially around an understanding of justice, and whether or not there's also a sentimentality that occurs around King, and particularly when we're unwilling to interrogate and push King on his homophobia and sexism. And, it's been, as much as there has been this kind of sentimentality around race produced by mass popular culture in The Help and The Butler, there's also been a sentimentality about King from the critics of President Obama who want to say President Obama is no king, true, but then they want to say President Obama is no king because he makes alliances and because he does, makes compromises. And I'm like, do you all have any idea who King is? And the kinds of compromises and alliances, and ask Fannie Lou Hamer if, in fact, King doesn't look just like the critiques that we have of President Obama. So it's not, so let me be clear, I'm not saying we shouldn't critique President Obama. What I am suggesting is that when we do so by holding up a vision of King that is this version that they've created on the mall where he steps out of stone, that we can reproduce that sentimentality,
but
particularly when we don't.
King. That's one king.
Yes.
I mean, I'm sorry, but most Americans don't even know the king ever said anything about fascism. They don't know that he ever said anything about a mounting white supremacy that would endanger our lives. So, I mean, I'm forgetting his name. I think it's Gary Young, who has done the I Dream speech book. But he talks about how there's this period where there is the sentimental king who's loved, but then as King begins to talk about imperialism and to talk about other things, that then he's talked about as a traitor, he's talked about, so I think that part of what we're all being called to is a more complex understanding of King. Because I totally agree with you. I mean, I hate to say it, in my budding militant feminism, I had no use for King. And I barely had use for Malcolm X because of what I felt to be their refusal to see the way patriarchy was hurting and wounding to black males and females and keeping us from the love that we deserve to be able to give one another. And so,
But I don't mean to throw King out at all. In
I
fact,
didn't think
actually,
you were.
Yeah. But I just worry about the ways. So, this is your same concern about sentimentality. Just to echo it back, that even as we engage the great ideas and the thinkers and the nuggets of understanding of justice and philosophy, that because we're so absent, black women are so absent from the story, we're willing to give a pass. And
I don't think that anyone would ever say about
not
bell
you,
hooks.
not you. I'm talking about us. I'm talking about an American vision of who counts as a hero. That's what I mean.
That's right. But I think that, we are still in the construction of a world where people don't want to accept that it is patriarchy that is killing black men, that it is an imperialistic patriarchy that threatens the life of black men of all ages, black males. I mean, all this week I've been talking about my little 7-year-old black male friend, who is having tremendous problems in predominantly white world. And I try to talk to his biracial mother and say, I think his problems have to do with race, that he looks out in the world. And not only does he see nothing that mirrors him, these other little white kids are telling him he's a monster, he's ugly. And so he finally she says, oh, I think you're just totally misguided, And then he finally gets into a fight at school, and he says, white people are just mean. And so there's this articulation of a racialized narrative from a 7-year-old that knows he's already on the outs, that there's no end for him. And I wonder about the trajectory of his life, that he can feel already the depths of an angst and despair, that there's no end for him. And I thought about that when you were talking about Trayvon Martin and talking about birthing a girl, a black girl, as opposed to a black male child. Because I do think that Melissa and I both represent that very oppositional reality that I write about, that we both have, against various odds in our life, invented ourselves. And I don't think that radical self-invention is as present for black males in their life, because for us, there is no seduction of power. There is no idea that, oh, well, if I just do the right thing with my dick, I will be able to enter into the power of patriarchy. And so I think that those things are just so intimate and deep in our lives right now, this sense of also the distance that's growing between black females and black males around, I think, these very issues.
So this one's hard.
I know we just need hours together.
It's so hard because I simultaneously, I felt it so much on the night of the Zimmerman verdict, and throughout that week and throughout the months that have passed. But it's also, when I hear you say the extent to which that you and I have had a set of challenges over which but I'm sitting here thinking, okay, now if I'm real honest about that, some of the most difficult, very personal barriers were placed there by black men. Purposely, actively, maliciously, cruelly, continuously, whether it was my sexual assault as a teenager by a black man who was an adult, whether it was we're live streaming.
She's going to have to talk about my buddy.
Right? No, yes, and that. By the time that one came along, there had been so many that had, and so for me, it's interesting for you to say this, because I'm light-skinned and cis and straight and have a white parent and have access to all kinds of privileges from birth. My bet is that I have been seduced by power. Now, I don't think that mine comes at the end of my penis, but my bet is that my proximity to whiteness has, in fact, allowed me over and over again a level of racial naivety and a willingness to believe that if I could just get the right white folks to give me cover, that it will be okay. And I think that has everything to do with being embodied in this body, and not so that even as we talk about the black woman's experience, that like the different kinds of black women's bodies in which we end up.
But Lynn, let's talk about the point in which you realize that ain't gonna happen.
Oh, I don't know that that's true. I mean, I show up on TV and say words because at the moment I have the cover of a powerful white man. Like at the moment, a white man is like, okay, you can sit on TV and say words. And the moment that powerful white man no longer wants me to sit on TV and say words, I will not be allowed to sit on TV and say words anymore.
But every time you speak, you have a choice. And I think that part of this huge following that's here tonight for you and that's out there in the world is because you have exercised that choice in a way that puts you at risk, in a way that makes it seem that yes, that power force larger than you could shut you down at any moment. But you don't allow that to happen, and that's the strength that I'm talking about. That's a different kind of, it's what it means to be in resistance. I mean, all week I've been quoting my beloved Paulo Freire. We cannot enter the struggle as objects in order to later become subjects. So you exercise the power of a redemptive subjectivity, an oppositional subjectivity right there in the belly of the beast, knowing all the time that you could be stopped at any moment. But you don't not do it. You don't express the views of the covering person that you described. You challenge yourself, and we challenge you.
But I still think of the riskier thing, of the braver thing, as because you write, because television killed my writing, I've written since the show, because you write, it exists forever. It's not ephemeral in the same way that broadcast is. And it feels to me so much more risky to write it, both because once you've written it, I can then quote it back to you. I can challenge you on it. I can hold you accountable to it. But also because there will come a point when you are gone and the 18-year-old will still pick it up and still read it and still discover black feminism. And then you did something, Belle, that strikes me as extremely dangerous to one's ego, which is you walked away from the brightest glare of public life, you returned to community, and the work that you are doing now feels to me like it gets rewarded in all of the ways that this system, the capitalism, the system that you named so that we can see the water that we're swimming in, the rewards won't be those rewards.
But it gives me that ground to stand on from which I can sustain my oppositional self. I mean, all throughout this week, and last night we had an amazing sister circle of women of color, but a lot of those women were articulating how hard it is to remain oneself, working in these systems, working here at the New School. And so I think partially, I mean, when I left New York City, I just will never forget that day. I'd been thinking suicidal thoughts. I was standing on the corner with 2 shoes that didn't match and all this other stuff. I knew that it was time to go and to return to some type of foundation that could allow me to sustain myself. When you've written a book that sells and it's selling really well, but then suddenly you're told, well, we don't want to publish you anymore. But no reasons given, no explanations, and all of those things that as black women testified throughout this week, that make you feel crazy, that make you feel like, okay, I did the things that I was supposed to do. I arrived at the destination, and all of a sudden I come to work one day and I'm locked out. And so I think that for me, it's this decision constantly to think about what nurtures that radical self, what holds me up. Shirley Chisholm holds me up. I mean, her unbought and unbossed taught me, much as Melissa and other people are saying that I taught them things, she taught me that I could be whoever I wanted to be without having to lie down, without having to be vulnerable and naked to the oppressor. But what I also learned from her was that the rewards would be lesser, that one would have to give up something. When I read a year or so ago, and Bell Hooks is talked about in Ms. as missing in action, and I think, what are they talking about? I'm sitting here writing, and there are things, again, I talked with the students, and Melissa will respond and we'll begin to close about, and open it up for questions, that when you are committed, you often have to do things you don't want to do. I am not interested in lean in, okay? But I wrote a piece about it because I was very disturbed by what I felt its overall impact. And because I wasn't particularly interested, writing the piece was torturous. I was so unhappy. And people kept telling me, well, why don't you stop? Why don't you? And all of you who know me know that I don't use myself much of the internet. So it's always in collaboration with other feminist sisters and brothers that things of bell hooks get on the internet. And so I had my colleague Stephanie Troutman saying, Belle, you agonized over this, you did it, let me put it on the internet for you. But that has been my story in writing from the beginning, that I have to say some things, but I'm not always somebody who wants to say them. I want somebody else to jump up and say them and take the heat.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, I mean, she's saying things, she takes the heat, and I just don't want you to downplay that. Despite our privilege, I mean, I have an enormously privileged life. And y'all know, y'all been hearing me talk about my cars and my houses and different things, material privilege, leisure, solitude. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't require courage, sacrifice. It doesn't mean that there isn't a bell welter of pain, because there often is, so that we carry on precisely because of those people who we stand looking out at them. Lorraine Hansberry. So many people we could name who remind me what I'm here to do. You know, it was Lorraine Hansberry who first taught me to start thinking critically about love. When she asked, that are black people loving people? Or are we so damaged and so traumatized? So that those issues of who we are and how we make our voices heard continue, because, you know, it's funny how Melissa, I feel very strongly, because I have lost family to death young recently, I feel very strongly that I can't count on a white racist world to keep the bell hooks book going. You know, and I laugh to people when they say, oh, Belle, why don't you digitize all these books? And I say, yeah, the moment they're electronic, a delete button can take them out of the universe. And so there is this way in which I'm struggling with, how do we protect our legacies as black females? How do we protect our voices? Because, you know, there's hundreds of men, black and white and whatever, who we don't know anything about what they ever did. But they have their institute, they have their whatever. And so I am asking myself at this critical juncture of my life, what am I doing to care for the legacy of my work? I am not assuming that that work, despite all of you wonderful people that are here tonight, will live if I don't do the necessary things to continue its life. I'm going to close. Melissa's going to say stuff, and we're going to have a few questions.
I think we can go to questions. I think there's a couple of mics.
And you know, ask your question quickly, because with Buddhist compassion, I will tell you not to give that speech. Your name?
So my name is Kalima DeSous, and I have a question regarding the pushback around 12 years a slave. And I would like to have a conversation about, Bell Hooks, you talked about feeling like you've seen enough of the black woman body and who've been sexually assaulted. And I'm wondering, how do we find a balance on telling that history of the sexual assault that black women have endured years and years and years up until 2013, at this particular hour, and while white women have stayed complacent, and imagining beyond that, holding that balance in a time when we are not being taught that at all.
But we are so much more than that, and that's really more the question. The question is not how we can image that or that it's not imaged. It's all of us and who we are that's not imaged. And why are we not? Why is there no world that wants to see the life someone like me leads as a black female? Economically self-sufficient, solitary, disciplined, writing. Why is that not interesting? Not as interesting as images of me if I were being beaten, raped, if the scars were on my body. That's what concerns me more than even the sentimental slavery or whatever, is why are we not, where is our decolonized image?
So, it's interesting because part of what I liked about 12 was that we got to see Patsy making the dolls, and we got to see her even in the context.
I even hated the little dolls.
Well, so for me, what the dolls meant, and even her ability in the context of the horror that was those late night performative dances, that in both of those contexts, she nonetheless she's still human in them, right? So, and that her humanity isn't entirely oppositional. So we see her humanity in her oppositional moment about the soap, but there's also that she can just be playful or be that social death is in fact a falsehood in understanding what slavery was, that there was still humanity in it. So, I mean, we have a reading of the film differently. That said, this notion of the abused black woman's body as becoming, so I started fairly early on in the show talking about being a sexual assault survivor. And, I've been doing campus work around sexual assault forever. I mean, it's not like it's a new thing. No one in my family, was this a new discovery? But I'm not sure that the people at the, organization where I work knew it one way or another, but they sort of like it. Not that they like that I was abused, but they like me when I'm the sentimental person. So they like when I write the letter to Trayvon Martin's mother, to Sabrina Fulton, which is legitimately how I felt, black mother to black mother. But is, as Belle was saying earlier, what it takes both to write it and to deliver it on air, and then to live with the consequences of having delivered it on air, is a lot. It's very costly. It's very expensive. So it is both something that is meaningful to do and very expensive. And so because it's very expensive, I don't want to do it a lot. Right? I want to do it, but I don't want to do it every week. It's just because shit hurts. And then, in fact, I remember when I did one of the letters around sexual assault, and we had done it at like 10:30, so I had an hour and a half of show left. So, I sat down and I said to myself, okay, sexual assault survivor, now it's time for dissociation. Now we're going to practice our dissociation practice. Here we go. All right, hour and a half of now talking about Syria and something else, right? So it's costly, so I don't like to do it a lot.
And you shouldn't do it a lot.
Right. But that's what, but there's back to the market, but that's the market, like people like that, Melissa. When Melissa is angry, yelling at the Economist.
I'll say clear.
Right.
And exact.
Exacting. When Melissa is goofy, as I pretty often am, and sometimes kind of goofy over the line, sometimes goofy over the line wearing feminine products in my ears. The desire not to see me, I mean, people saying to me, that's not you, you're not that, don't do that. Well, of course I'm that. Of course I am silly and goofy and crazy and over the top. And sometimes I'm kind of, sexy and bad and fly and all that. And sometimes I am mad, and sometimes I am very sad and hurt and in pain and because, well, shit, I'm human. But I do think, and so on this one, though, this notion of range, not only in our consumption in popular culture, but our desire to consume the strong black woman who overcomes the worst circumstances is the thing that we like the best. And I say we, like both the broad American public, black people, we like strong black women, but weak, pitiful black woman, funny black, we already know we don't like funny black women, that she can't get a job, right? We are live streaming. I keep forgetting we are on the air, right? So just, yes. Yeah, no job.
So
when I
what we're
get
really
back.
talking about, though, is the whole question of what does it mean to have optimal emotional well-being? Because when you have optimal emotional well-being, you can be whole. You can be the diversities of who yourself is. And so you're saying, we have to resist again and again people trying to deny us that space of emotional well-being by keeping us trapped into the plantation culture that says this is who we are. Your name, your quick question?
Oh. You got me by surprise. No, I was thinking about your definition of optimal
Well-being.
well-being. Okay. So my name is Ariel. I'm the president and founder of a nonprofit organization called Trans Diaspora Network, and I work with inner city kids. And I always participate in these forums in a very candid way, because I do believe that dialogue and communication is a good way to create awareness. Yeah, I'm getting there. But I'm putting this in context because for me, as a leader of a nonprofit organization working with inner city kids, it's a kind of to see the disconnection between the high cultural elite of black people producing culture with what's going on in the inner city black sort of plantation neighborhoods. That sometimes you see girls that even when they turn 17, they haven't even been on the Brooklyn Promenade to see that view of Manhattan that is very popular.
You got to ask a question though.
Yeah, no.
Okay,
I'm going to ask the question.
Okay,
So
yep.
how we, the black leaders, can create a contrast not to white men, but how we can create a colorful palette in order to educate the young generations with these powerful contents that you create in order to fight injustice.
I got to disagree with you that culture is made by the black elite. I live in New Orleans. The culture is made actually by the inner city kid. The most powerful diasporic cultural tradition currently operating in the world was made by black and Puerto Rican kids in the inner cities of this city. Now, what I will say is living in New Orleans in a place where poor people are the people who create the culture that is then
Marketed.
that is then sold and is like, so then now the consensus on both the right and the left is that what's happening, for example, in the New Orleans school systems is good. This is improvement in the schools. And of course, one of the most important things is that we ripped out all music education from the schools. So I actually don't think we need to go teach kids culture. I think we just need to give young people, wealthy and poor, the tools, and they will create the culture.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
creating the tools.
well, yeah, resources. I mean, for me, it's resources. Like,
And
I don't think we need to go tell them what to do.
No, I'm
But I
talking
wanna-
more
I
about
wanna
tools and
add to this.
way to defend themselves, because what happened when they are in a
Brother, we don't talk while she was talking. We shouldn't interrupt someone. Sorry,
I want to
continue.
say that plantation culture is not just the culture that the poor live within. We are all living within plantation culture. Our roles, our resources are maybe radically different, but it's part of some false notion of privilege to believe that we are somehow not touched by the plantation culture that the very, very people on the bottom are living. Harsher lives, riskier lives, but the plantation culture is what the U.S. is making in the world, and it is what is sustaining here. Your question, my sweet, your name?
My name's Tanya Fields. I was actually on Melissa's show last month. I'm a low-income mom
Yes, I
living
saw
in the...
you.
And my daughter's first board book was Happy to be Nappy.
All right.
And the words that you guys are saying right now are so sustaining. As a low-income black mother, I have been struggling to find my voice. And so I've been using my platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and talking about this being a whole person, what it means to be unmarried with 3 baby daddies and 4 kids. The pushback that I am often feeling is not from the white folks in the community. It is from the other sisters who tear me down, tell me that the reason that I am low income is because I didn't have the insight to choose good men, that I should have kept my hand out and my mouth closed and my legs closed and kept my hand out. And so I'm trying to figure out, as we talk about this plantation culture, as I try to rise above my circumstances and literally create meals that the babies in my community can eat, how do we... It stops you from wanting to have that voice. I have people who tell me, when you talk about being low income, don't talk about feeding your kids on food stamps. You don't need an audience for that. Suffer in shame and in silence. The situation that you are feeling is your own and is product of your own bad choice. I am pregnant with my 5th child and just had this man walk out on me. How do you wake up every morning? And I consider myself a black feminist, but some days it's just so hard to get out of the bed and face other black people.
I said, take it. I actually said, take it, Mom.
So that is exactly what the whole thing is designed to do. The language you used, sit alone in your shame and suffer alone. So so it would, it's just to say that, so, you know, I could turn into my academic self, which says the reason that people who are most vulnerable to being in your exact same circumstance are the ones who most want to shame you is because it's the same reason that it's the sorority girls on campus who say that you got to keep yourself from getting raped by not drinking, and it's because it's the same reason that the churches that are growing among black folks are the prosperity, health, and wealth ones instead of liberation theology churches, right? And it's because it is much easier to believe that we can solve inequality by pulling up our pants or keeping our legs closed, or, right? So it allows you to wipe away all of the structural realities that require collective action and that require work that goes over and past your own life. So if it's just your individual decision making, then I'm safe from it. So as long as I make a different decision, I will never be vulnerable to poverty or to heartache or to pain. And I will just say, you know, that your point about making all the right choices, right? So I can remember the point at which I became a single parent, and I was like, okay, but whoa, wait a minute. I did everything right, and I got my degree first, and then I got married, I got my degree first, then I got married, then I bought a house, then I got pregnant. I'm supposed to be all good, and that motherfucker was like, peace, out, and went and just was, and there I stood with a baby. Now I stood there with a baby and a degree, and as a homeowner. So the shame, I didn't have to, right? So. Because it's not really about being a single parent, it's about being poor. The thing you're supposed to be ashamed of is being poor. And so so I will just say that shaming, it is a defense mechanism to keep people from having to do the hard work of organizing. And it is the most dangerous thing in marginalized communities. It is the most dangerous thing because then we do not organize because we can just say that if only you had made different choices, then everything would be fine.
I think we have to remember constantly that shaming is one of the deepest tools of imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy because shame produces trauma. And trauma often produces paralysis. Yes. So when the sister said that there are days that she just can't get out of bed, lots of us experience that sense of paralysis. So that healing, I have to go back to, I'm not going to belabor it, but to emotional well-being, because we've got to have some mechanisms to resist what is out there, to resist the constant shaming. Your name?
Hi, I'm Charmin. I go to CUNY, and I just want to say this is one of the most beautiful audiences I've ever seen, and I'd
Hello,
like to
yay.
extend my invitation to more public universities and institutions where people that look like us are wanting your presence, and especially because you guys don't come here too often, so just want to put that out there. And I also wanted to say that, like, as a political organizer that is looking to demilitarize CUNY, kicking Petraeus out of CUNY, kicking militarism out of CUNY, how do we deal with those hyper-masculine personalities that have values of anti-imperialism and anti-racism, but end up making me feel uncomfortable in spaces of radical organizing where we're talking about these really, really important issues, but understanding that imperialism is in your blood, brother, and that's exactly what you're showing me when you're shutting me up to get the mic, right? So I just wanted a healthy way to deal with that, sis, because I cannot do anti-military organizing right now just because of the hyper-masculinity and the way that it's going, but I am invested, you know? I'm sorry. I just got interrupted.
Well, I'm not going to have a long answer to that, but I also want to encourage us, as we talked about in my undergraduate class today, when we talk about hypermasculinity, if what we mean is patriarchy, that's what we need to say.
Okay.
Because we have to have a space to love, to revere, and to honor that which is masculine, but it's not patriarchal. And if we are constantly equating the two, then we are part of the assault on masculinity, on black males. Did you want to speak to that?
So I appreciate you dividing out the masculinity and the patriarchy. I think that's a critical one that we don't do. And part of what I would say is, yep. And true. And you know, in very public ways, Bell Hooks and I have both encountered that. The entire history of black women's organizing, but then I'll also say, but then black women have performed that, particularly straight black women have performed that around queer women of color. Privileged women of color have performed that around undocumented and poor women. And even within LGBT movements, cis women, even cis gay women perform that around trans women. And so that, I think it's part of the importance of pulling out hypermasculinity, because you can be quite femme and be performing this same patriarchal bull of taking the mic, right? So it's just to say that that's why it's easier to say, pull up your pants and close your legs, because organizing is hard, because people, I mean, who doesn't love the people, like in theory, but the actual people? I mean, the actual people are very annoying and hard and difficult, and you have to give a little and get and put in this, So, I mean, welcome.
Hello, my name is Ebony Murphy-Root. I'm a middle school English teacher from Hartford, Connecticut, currently working here. And Dr. Hooks, you've talked a lot about black and white female school teachers. You obviously cover a lot of ed reform in your show, Dr. Harris Perry. Where are the black female voices, the black female working school teacher voices in ed reform? Because I feel like oftentimes working as a public school teacher in Hartford, Connecticut, working now, that we are being blamed for a culture that we did not create, for problems that come in every day at schools that we didn't create, and yet we are being demonized and excluded from this conversation.
Well, I mean, you ask where you are. You are the targets, dear. You are the reason that there is a powerful anti-union, anti-teacher, go get the TFA Ivy Leaguers to teach the babies instead. I mean, it is not a mistake that the sector that is dominated by educated women of color performing a task of reproduction is the one where there is bipartisan consensus to destroy it. So that's where you are. You've got the target on your back, and it is the very reality that those are the bodies most impacted by the deunionization movement, by the chartering movement, and by the movement to bring TFA into and actually staff hold. So TFA is a lovely program at its initiation, which is the idea that wealthy, Ivy League privileged children should go and spend a little time in the world before they run off to run the world, right? It's actually I know I'm saying that sort of sarcastically, but it's a smart idea, right? Before you go off and make policy, before you go to Wall Street, before you go and run for office, spend 2 years in the classroom. Because what that does is it was a program whose focus was on the young person, right? Not the student. You weren't going in to save the student, you were going in to save yourself, right? And that's good. Like, yes, great idea. We should do that. And then because you would go with a little humility and you would sit quietly and listen to a teacher who would tell you things, and you would learn, you would observe, and then you would walk away. The problem with TFA came when it stopped being about the salvation of the privileged, who needed a little saving of their full humanity in order to be better policymakers, and instead became that somehow they would save the children and the classrooms from professional teachers who'd committed their lives to working for very little pay, very few resources in schools. That's why you're not at the table, because you're the thing that we are seeking to destroy in education reform.
Okay, we are going to hear these questions and try to answer them. We'll hear the three of them because our time is coming to a close. Your question, sweetheart, your name?
My name is Zaina, and my question is, was there a moment, for both of you, was there a moment when you realized that this is it, I need to write, I need to say something, I need to talk, and how did you, push back against the urge? I mean, if you had, the urge to silence yourself?
Okay, so we'll hold that. Your question? We're going to hear all these 4 questions. And yes, Charlie.
Hi, I'm Nikisha Lewis, and you talked about the gap that currently exists between men and women in the Black community. And so as I'm thinking about Renisha McBride today and the outrage that I feel doesn't yet exist over her life, the loss of her life, as it existed over the loss of Trayvon Martin's life, I'm really angry and fighting back tears in my work every day. So how do we bridge this gap, this divide in our community so that we can value all of our lives, Black women and girls' lives, as much as we value the lives of our men and boys that we love dearly?
Okay, and
hi, my name is Virginia. I'm here with Public Allies, and my question is, how instrumental is the male and or white ally in the movement against patriarchy?
Hi, I have a question about African American imperialism and the mode at which we are privileged in our idea of Blackness. And we throw Blackness around as if we all understand what that is. And we travel the world. There is a world out there, a global world that we exist in that identifies with Blackness as an othering. So how do we leave room for that conversation when we start to inflict capitalist ways of thinking on other people?
well, I'm going to start with that question of why can't we value Black female lives? Until we challenge patriarchy, there is going to be no valuing of Black women's lives over the small valuing of Black male lives that takes place, because the very structure militates against it. So, I mean, one of the things I've always felt so strongly and really expressed in We Real Cool is the depths of Black male woundedness by patriarchal terrorism. And until those wounds get addressed in some way, I don't think we're going to get the respect, the recognition, the care. Because I was thinking about how even Oscar Grant's mother is portrayed at the end of the film as blaming herself. She should not have, not that we get a full-on calling out of the system that destroys him. So
Yes, and I think part of what happens is, so I assume when you say we value, I assume you mean Black communities. Part of what I would suggest is that what works for us is tropes that are connected to something that we understand. And this is, I'm still thinking about your critique of 12 Years a Slave. And so one of the tropes that we understand about Black women's suffering is the idea of a Black woman raped by the white male slave owner, right? That one we get. So if you go back to the case, the Duke Lacrosse case, right? You had immediate community mobilization. I mean, that day, that night, calls for it, action, right? Because that trope, black woman sexually assaulted by white man in South on Old Plains, like that one we understood. We had a thing to hang it on. We know the story that is, and we can tell it. Now, so pause for me a moment on that, and let's go to various stories about black men's victimization and the ways in which those stories often hang on the trope that we know that is the lynching trope. So we like to forget, because it's painful to remember, that in the week after Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, during his hearing about Anita Hill, said, this is a high-tech lynching, that the public opinion polls showed that greater than 50% of African Americans supported Clarence Thomas's confirmation to the bench. Now, I think that's because he used the trope of lynching, and that we're like, oh yeah, right, black man, white, Joe Biden and the other white guys saying mean things. That looks like lynching. I know that trope. And of course, no one's ever been lynched for what they've done to a black woman. White men don't posse up to go get a black man for what he did to a black woman. But that story, it's why there was increased radio play of R. Kelly after he raped a child in our community. It's why people don't want to believe Mike Tyson did it, right? Because we get the vulnerable black man facing white lynch mob. That's the story that the Trayvon Martin story fits into for us. Marissa Alexander doesn't fit our story because she is shooting a gun at an abusive black husband coming at her. We may know that, we may intimately know that story, but we don't have a story, a trope, a thing that is the abuse of black women's bodies by black men. And in the case of Renisha, I don't think we yet have coped with, because when the Trayvon Martin moment happened and the Zimmerman verdict happened, all of us were saying, these are the conversations we have with our sons about our sons' public safety. And I think we have missed how much our girls are equally vulnerable in that space. So we don't have a good trope, we don't have a thing to call why a white man opening the door, right? So allegedly, what we think we know at this point is that he opens the door and sees her as a physical threat to him. What is that? What is the story? So we know a white man creeping down and raping the black woman, but we don't know a white man afraid of black woman knocking at his door. What is that story, right? So part of it is, I think, just a general devaluation, but the other part of it is, I think if it doesn't fit a story that we have easily available to us, and there aren't very many stories about our victimization that are easily available that we can deploy and use, and so we're gonna have to generate those. I do think that's part of it, at least.
So there was the question about writing. Was there a moment? And for me, those moments are just ongoing and endless, but they began for me as a girl in Virginia Street Baptist Church when I was encouraged to write for our church little magazine and stuff like that.
Are you a writer? Do you feel that impulse to write? And you feel it even when there's other stuff to be done? So I wonder, because you asked about the silencing, do you self-edit when you're writing, like you're pulling back? Only when you're writing for yourself, or when you're also... So when you're writing for yourself, it's all there. But if you're writing for an audience, you're pulling it back? Who's the audience typically? Teachers?
I'm going to have to speed you on.
Yes, okay, I'm sorry. My bet is that question wasn't about us, right? Who cares when I thought about writing? My bet is that question's about you and that you're working on, but if you ask that question and the real question is, am I a writer? The answer is yes. Of course you are. If you ask that question, of course you're a writer. And if you're self-editing, at least find some friendly audiences, some safe audiences where you can write without, it's okay to self-edit, to feel fearful of your audience. I think that's okay, particularly when you're a young writer, but also just make sure you have some audiences, someone who's reading for you, who is a safe place for you to write.
Okay, are you answering the imperialism question?
No, you want to answer that one? I get in too much trouble behind this. Yeah.
I'm going to be honest. Part of my silence is I've forgotten parts of the question. I didn't forget the imperial.
Of black versions, of American versions of blackness, right, and capitalism, right. This is.
There was the patriarchal allies, which was the woman behind you.
Yeah, we're coming to that one.
Yeah.
I think that it happens within both men and women, and it does happen to men and women, but the implications of privilege with our ideas of blackness, being that blackness has changed over time, like you're talking about president in office right now, and him being an African-American imperialist, essentially, and subconsciously that affecting all of us who do that as well when we travel. So there's a world out there that we don't identify with all the time.
Well, I think you've stated it. I mean, that's what's real. I mean, what's scary is why people don't want to face that reality. Why they want to still pretend that there's some solidified blackness, and not. I mean, that there's tremendous crisis in blackness because our class differences and separations grow more intense daily, and we're asked to believe that there's still some kind of R&B blackness that unites us. Will you take the patriarchal question and then we're going to close?
Yeah, right. Well, I think we remember the patriarchy question. Yeah. So, I mean, I guess the one thing I would say is,
I'll just say it again. So, how instrumental is the male and/or white ally in our movement against patriarchy?
I've actually been questioning this use of the word ally because I think that if someone is standing on their own beliefs, and their own beliefs are anti-patriarchal, anti-sexist, they are not required to be anybody's ally. They are on their front line in the same way that I'm on my front line. And I can tell you, women, when you find those men in patriarchy, gay, straight, trans, whatever, that are on the front line, we recognize them. The sad truth is that there are so few of them. Okay. Are you saying something?
Yeah, So one thing I would, so this is my academic, this is my professorial self. I worry anytime we expect, so sometimes one of the pieces of language used, particularly in the academy, maybe it's also used in media, I'm not so sure, is this idea of role modeling. We need you to be there in that body to role model to other people who have bodies similar to yours that these things are possible. And I have very mixed emotions about that role modeling idea, in part because I think that the imagination of Black Americans is, our sort of critical, moral, creative imagination is one of our great accomplishments in the U.S. context. Our ability to imagine freedom in the context of intergenerational chattel bondage, our ability to believe that God loves us when there is no empirical evidence that God does love us, our willingness to engage. Right, so I actually don't know that we need to see, I mean, I think what part of our genius is that we don't need to see it to nonetheless believe it and pursue it. And in fact, even in as much as that is, I think, as Cornel West would say, a unique gift of Black people to the American project, right? I mean, that's the language that he uses, right? It's one of our gifts, particularly in the post 9/11 moment. That as much as that is true, it's also been true of even the nastiest, low-down, racist patriarchs of our nation. So my daughter, and I'll promise I'm going to end, my daughter is in 6th grade, and she had to learn the Declaration of Independence, the little, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and governments are instituted among men to protect these rights, right? Okay? She was hot. Mad. She was like, this is some old bull. That was not true. 1776, people were slaves, women couldn't vote. She's just mad, walking around the house, mad. Now, part of it is because she's in 6th grade, so she's mad if the sun comes up. So she's just mad. But she was mad behind this. So Thomas Jefferson is vile. Like, he's vile, right? He owns his own children at various points. And this is the final ally, but he didn't write a document that says, we think that maybe possibly old white men with money are equal in a few kind of ways, and maybe they could get that's what the Constitution says. But the Declaration of Independence has a moral imagination beyond the empirical reality of the 1776 Monticello Mountain. And so I don't know that I need patriarchs and white men but what is possible on that kind of allied position is for them to imagine something bigger than what is in this moment. And so as much as I've had my little, critiques about the people who work at MSNBC and in the leadership, those old white guys who are rich and powerful and sit around a table and maybe someday, maybe today, will fire me and everyone else. They nonetheless they could say, oh, well, what if we put a little gay girl on here, and what if we put a little black girl on here, and maybe how about the Asian girl at noon, and and those are things that required a little bit of. It's not revolution, it's the opposite of revolution, but it is a little imagination.
At heart, also, our movement away from binaries. Yeah. So we would like to leave you with this whole notion that if you work for freedom, one of the ways that you can work for freedom is to change your mind and to move away from the space of binaries, of simplistic either-ors, both and to be able to look at the picture that offers us complexity. I want to thank Stephanie Browner, Heather, and Jennifer for all their work, and my sister, my soul sister, Melissa Harris Perry, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Belle. Thank you, Belle.